guys, it's Lindsay at the blog Repurpose and Upcycle, and today we're talking about chalk paint. Chalk paint has essentially changed the furniture painting business, and mainly it's because it's so easy to use, and I'm going to talk all about what chalk paint is and how to transform a simple piece with chalk paint. Okay, first and foremost, what is chalk paint? So chalk paint, all it is a latex-based paint mixed with calcium carbonate and water. And so the calcium carbonate, that's what allows it to give it that chalky finish and make it so easy to work with. Chalk paint, the best part about chalk paint is it has what you call self-leveling properties. So if I put a lot of paint over here and a little paint over here, the coverage will still look the same, essentially. So I want to talk about the steps on how to chalk paint and the materials that you're going to need to use chalk paint. So first and foremost, brushes. Let's talk about chalk paint brushes for a minute. It's recommended that you use a round brush. You don't have to. My opinion is the round brush is pretty necessary when you're adding something like wax, because the round brush is really good about getting in all the little crevices to really create a highlight that you use, especially when you're using dark wax. But if you don't want to use a round brush, they're kind of expensive. If you're just painting on with the chalk paint, you can use something like this. Now, I wouldn't suggest a synthetic brush. Use a natural bristle brush like this. So I'm going to show you real quick just how to put one coat of chalk paint over a simple piece of furniture like this. The first thing you do is you always prepare a piece by cleaning it, if you need to degrease it, and just getting all the lint off of it with a lint-free rag. The second thing, find the brush you're going to use. I'm not going to use a round brush. I don't think it's super necessary for this. I don't have a lot of crevices or small little areas I need to get the paint into. But I am going to use a natural bristle brush. I'm going to use this, and here's my chalk paint. I'm just using a generic chalk paint. And the first thing you do is you just apply the first coat on. So once you have your chalk paint and your bristle brush, you just start to paint it on. A lot of different makers, a lot of different companies are going to give you different ideas on how to paint chalk paint. Some people say go in an X motion, and some people say just paint it on straight. Okay, so chalk paint has what they call self-leveling properties. And what that means is if I paint a lot of paint over here and just a little paint over here, it self-levels so it looks even. And that's what's so great about chalk paint. Number one, you can paint over anything. That extra calcium carbonate in the latex paint, that's what allows it to stick to virtually any surface. And in one sense, chalk paint is a lot like primer. And the reason they call it chalk paint is because once it's dried, all you have to do is take a little bit of sandpaper and wipe it, and you will get a chalky substance, like a chalky residue. So the name really speaks for itself, chalk paint, because it really does turn into a chalk dust when it's sanded. But that's what makes it also so forgiving and so easy to distress. And that's why we've seen this big kick towards, distressing furniture and really this shabby chic look, because it's so popular because it's so easy. Let's talk about the different types of chalk paint for a minute. I'm just using a very generic type, nothing really fancy, nothing really expensive. And here's my opinion on that. And like I said, this is my opinion. One thing I've learned, the higher the dollar the chalk paint, or what they would call higher quality chalk paint, it's going to be a lot more expensive, but typically it covers more. So if you buy a chalk paint from, say, like a big box store, a quart might be half the price than, say, a chalk paint you might buy from a boutique or you might order online. What I have learned is just because it's cheaper doesn't mean it's going to have the same coverage. So that big box store, that quart of the big box store chalk paint might last you 2 medium-sized pieces of furniture, whereas the higher dollar boutique chalk paint might last you 4 or 5 larger pieces of furniture. So when you break it down by coverage, the boutique or the higher quality chalk paint actually ends up being cheaper. And like I said, that's my opinion. That's just been my experience. So, and that's just something, most people who paint furniture, they quickly find the type of chalk paint they like, and they typically, there's one they like over another, because chalk paint, just because it says chalk paint or chalky style chalk paint, they're all very different, and they're all going to have very different coverage. And so the bottom line, try a ton of different types of chalk paint. I don't think one is better than the other. They're just all very different. Even though it might say chalk paint or chalky style chalk paint, it doesn't mean one is going to have the same finish as the other. And like I said, some of the cans I bought will last forever, while some of them will only last 1 or 2 different smaller projects. Another thing, what about chalk spray paint? I've used chalk spray paint twice, and it worked pretty good. My only issue was it just didn't go very far. So I did a bookcase, and that bookcase took me 3 cans of chalk spray paint. So if you're gonna do anything of decent size, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're doing a small project, like it might actually work on something like this, or something small like a candlestick or a lamp, more like an accessory. That's what I would use the chalk spray paint for. I'm just applying the first coat, and you'll notice the first coat, there's still a lot of brush strokes on it. That's normal. Normally it takes the second coat of chalk paint to really give it that smooth, ultra matte finish. So I'm still working on the first coat. And one thing about these natural bristle brushes, they shed a little bit easier than, say, a synthetic brush. And a synthetic brush is what you would like paint a wall with. So be careful, because a lot of times you'll see a lot of extra little bristles. So make sure to go over your piece of furniture and pull those little bristles out if you see them. So like I said, the first coat of chalk paint always looks very unfinished. The first coat isn't necessarily going to self-level like you want. That's where the second coat is going to go over it, and it's going to look super smooth. I'm going to let this first coat sit for a minute, and I will show you what it looks like when I add the second coat. Okay guys, I'm back, and I'm really trying to zoom in and show you the first coat versus the second coat. So this is the first coat, and it dries fairly quickly. Within an hour, I feel like it's good to go. So now I'm going to brush the second coat on. And this is where you really see it look smooth and finished. It's looking better and better. One thing I get asked about is, can you put chalk paint in a sprayer? And the answer is yes. Well, every sprayer will have different directions. A lot of times it will give you directions on how to dilute the chalk paint so that you can safely put it in your sprayer. So my suggestion is just read the directions for your specific type, and I'm almost positive it'll give you directions on how to dilute it. Now I'm getting there with my second coat, and it's become very evident I'm going to need a third coat, which I should have known because I'm going from a very dark wood to white. And I could have used a primer. You can either use a primer first and then 1 or 2 coats of chalk paint, or 3 coats of chalk paint. That's generally a good rule of thumb. So I'm just going to do 3 coats of chalk paint. I hope this video has given you guys a few quick tips on how to chalk paint and a little bit more about what chalk paint is. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video, guys, and stay tuned because my next video is going to be about how to wax furniture.